The video opens with a slow pan across the Santa Monica skyline, the lights of Los Angeles stretching endlessly into the night, glittering like a sea of promises, yet casting long, cold shadows over the city. On a balcony overlooking this dizzying expanse stands Audra Sterling, soon to be known as Ayra Solace. She is draped in a flowing haute couture gown that catches the city lights with every subtle movement. Her hair perfectly styled, her posture elegant. To the outside world, she is a figure of absolute control and undeniable glamour, a Hollywood star at the peak of her success. Yet the camera lingers on the slight tension in her shoulders, the ghost behind her gaze. She looks like she owns the city, the fame, the life she always wanted, but the truth seeps through every measured breath. She feels vulnerable, haunted, and strangely alone. The juxtaposition is jarring. This is a woman at the pinnacle of her career. Yet the world she has conquered is not a sanctuary, it's a stage, and every sparkle of the city below is a reminder of the battles she fought to survive. The scene shifts, almost imperceptibly, into fragmented flashbacks. We see a younger Audra, barely 19, clutching a worn duffel bag and a handful of crumpled bills, stepping onto the cracked sidewalks of Los Angeles for the first time. Her wide-eyed excitement is met with harshness, rejection, and ridicule. Casting directors shake their heads, murmuring phrases like "too raw," "no brand identity," "lacks the pedigree." Every audition becomes a battlefield, each rejection a reminder that Hollywood doesn't reward talent alone. It demands conformity, compliance, and the erasure of vulnerability. She navigates dimly lit theater halls, crowded waiting rooms, and impersonal coffee shops, carrying her dreams like fragile glass, yet already learning the first lesson of survival here. Hope can be weaponized against you if you appear too eager, too honest, too human. The flashbacks are interspersed with glimpses of Elias Vance, a man whose presence commands rooms effortlessly, whose calm authority seems protective, even benevolent. He sees her, praises her, promises mentorship and guidance. In those first encounters, he is everything she needs, a gateway to the world she so desperately wants, but the camera hints at a subtle menace beneath his smile, a shadow behind the warm gaze that Audra cannot yet recognize. The tension rises as we are pulled deeper into the story. The flashbacks intensify, briefly showing the night she walked into his private studio office. The doors sealed, the curtains drawn, the atmosphere electric with predatory control. Audra's fingers tremble as she reaches for the documents he holds in his hand, her heart pounding. The camera doesn't linger on the assault itself, it doesn't need to. But the viewer feels the terror in her eyes, the fight or flight instinct igniting as she realizes the power imbalance she faces. Every shadowed corner of the office, every polished surface, becomes a trap, a reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized. Her narrow escape is shown in quick, fragmented shots. A slammed door, a shattering glass, a single flash of blood, her sprinting down the hallway, breath ragged but alive. It is chaos distilled into moments of raw, palpable fear. The horror is not just the physical danger, it is the betrayal of someone she trusted implicitly. Someone who promised to guide her through the treacherous corridors of Hollywood but instead used her dreams as leverage. Even after her escape, the trauma lingers. The video flashes to the aftermath, the anonymous blogs, the vicious headlines, the social media storm designed to destroy her reputation. Audra Sterling sleeps her way to the top. Desperate starlet causes scandalous incident at midnight meeting. Agencies rescind offers, auditions vanish, doors slam shut with an echoing finality. The contrast is brutal. The bright lights of fame she once chased now become weapons against her. Her dreams are no longer fragile. They are public property, dissected and mocked, used to humiliate her. Every whisper of Hollywood gossip, every viral post, compounds the pain, and the audience feels the weight of a world that was supposed to nurture her talent, instead punishing her for surviving. Through this montage, the camera returns repeatedly to Audra on the balcony, watching the city she's always wanted, yet feeling the gnawing absence of safety and recognition. The glamour has not softened the scars, it only magnifies them. The hook escalates by interweaving her outer success with inner turmoil. Close-ups show the subtle signs, her hand tightening on the balcony railing, her eyes scanning the distant horizon not for opportunity, but for calculated possibilities. The viewer senses that this is no ordinary narrative of triumph and loss. This is the prelude to a meticulously crafted reckoning. Her expression shifts from haunted vulnerability to quiet, controlled determination. She is no longer simply reacting to past injustice, she is strategizing, preparing for the moment where the power dynamic reverses. The stakes are clear. Audra will not allow the system, the predators, or the facades of power to define her life again. Every frame in this opening segment underscores that her glamour is not comfort, it is armor, and the city beneath her is both playground and battlefield. Finally, the hook delivers the emotional cliffhanger, the line that lingers in the viewer's mind and compels them to stay. They thought they destroyed me, but they prepared me to destroy them. It encapsulates both the injustice she endured and the calculated revenge she is about to execute. The phrase resonates with universal themes of betrayal, survival, and empowerment, immediately establishing Audra as a figure the audience will root for and fear simultaneously. The tension is heightened further by a brief, natural call to action, inviting viewers to engage directly. Before I tell you how she reclaimed everything, tell me where you're watching from. This simple interaction pulls the audience into her world, making them not just spectators, but witnesses to the unfolding story of triumph, strategy, and revenge. Throughout the 6:30 runtime of this hook, the viewer is guided through a spectrum of emotions: awe at the visual grandeur of Hollywood, empathy for Audra's early struggles, tension at the betrayal and danger she faces, and suspense at the promise of her return and calculated vengeance. The juxtaposition of light and shadow, success and trauma, glamour and horror, immediately hooks the viewer while laying the foundation for an emotionally charged narrative that will sustain engagement across the entire 35-minute video. Every element, the balcony, the flashbacks, the hints of danger, the public humiliation, and the pivot from victim to strategist, is carefully calibrated to ensure that by the end of this segment, the audience is invested in Audra's journey, eager to follow her through the trials, transformation, and ultimate triumph that the story promises. By the end of the hook, viewers not only understand who Audra Sterling is and what she has endured, but they also feel the electricity of her impending reckoning. It establishes both the scale of the Hollywood system she confronts and the depth of her personal resolve. The city lights, the shadows, the flashbacks, and the suspenseful music all combine to create a visceral, cinematic experience that immediately embeds the story into the audience's consciousness, ensuring they are emotionally, intellectually, and morally hooked on Audra's journey from victimhood to strategic empowerment. The introduction begins by grounding the audience in Audra Sterling's humble, unassuming beginnings. Born in a quiet, unremarkable Midwestern town, she grew up surrounded by the muted rhythm of everyday life, a place where dreams rarely stretched beyond local ambitions, and where ambition was often quietly swallowed by practicality. Her parents were academics, immersed in research and scholarship, their lives structured by routine and intellectual pursuit rather than the glittering chaos of Hollywood. Yet from an early age, Audra's eyes were fixed on a different horizon. While her peers were content with local achievements and the predictable rhythm of small-town existence, she devoured every script she could find, treating each one as sacred text, a roadmap to a world far larger than her own. Theater became her sanctuary. Every performance she attended, every production she watched, fed a hunger that could not be satiated by ordinary life. She practiced tirelessly, alone in the dim light of her bedroom or the echoing halls of her community theater, mimicking, analyzing, rehearsing, perfecting, obsessed with craft. Her drive was singular, almost feral, a relentless pursuit of something she couldn't yet name but could already feel with every fiber of her being. Talent alone wasn't enough in her eyes. She wanted mastery, a command of her craft so complete that it could bend the judgment of any audience, any gatekeeper. But the moment she arrived in Los Angeles at 19, clutching nothing but a worn duffel bag, a handful of crumpled bills, and a heart full of hope, the city made one thing immediately clear: raw talent was not currency here. She entered audition rooms like a naive dreamer, unpolished and earnest, and the industry responded with cold, surgical cruelty. Casting directors and agents, conditioned to filter ambition into convenient categories, dismissed her with a smile that never touched their eyes. Too raw, no brand identity, lacks the pedigree, they would say, their words heavy with subtle, institutionalized disdain. Every rejection was a lesson in survival, each dismissive glance a reminder that Hollywood didn't reward potential. It demanded malleability, conformity, and often the sacrifice of personal boundaries. Audra learned quickly that the theater of dreams had a darker side. Ambition could be weaponized, and hope could be used against those who dared to cling to it. In this crucible of mockery and marginalization, she began to understand the rules of a world designed to consume idealists, the game where charm, compliance, and strategic compromise often mattered more than raw brilliance. Yet even as she stumbled, even as doors slammed, she never lost the fire that had carried her from her quiet hometown to the neon glare of the West Coast. Amid this landscape of rejection and quiet humiliation, a voice emerged, a figure who seemed to offer sanctuary. Elias Vance, a man whose very presence carried authority, was the type of figure whose name commanded respect in every studio and classroom he entered. To Audra, he was everything she had dreamed of: a mentor, a guide, someone capable of shaping raw talent into professional dominance. He offered her a full scholarship to his exclusive acting academy, claiming he saw in her a once-in-a-generation talent. The camera lingers on the way she looks at him. Admiration, trust, a desperate need for validation. His office, his words, his encouragement, all of it formed a false sense of security, a structure she could lean on in a world otherwise hostile. Under his tutelage, she refined her craft, diction, expression, camera presence, timing, all dissected, analyzed, and meticulously honed. His mentorship seemed to validate everything she had fought for, and for a time, it seemed the Hollywood machine might finally recognize her worth. But the camera gives subtle hints of unease, a hand lingering too long, praise weighted with inappropriate attention, moments where his gaze feels like it measures her rather than guides her. Audra, desperate to belong and blinded by ambition, rationalizes these breaches, interpreting them as sacrifices for the craft, as the hidden price of entry into the very world she has chased relentlessly. Then comes the night that changes everything. Audra walks into his private studio office, expecting opportunity, perhaps a small measure of recognition for years of toil. Instead, the camera shows a sealed space, heavy curtains drawn, two silent studio producers seated like judges of her fate. The lighting is clinical yet menacing, highlighting the predatory control Elias wields. Her stomach knots, her hands tremble. He smiles, a practiced smile, void of warmth, and offers champagne and documents, a veneer of celebration masking the trap beneath. The audience is shown just enough to understand the danger without indulging in graphic detail. The struggle, the betrayal, the threat of power misused. In these moments, her vulnerability is palpable. She fights, narrowly escapes, bloodied, tear-stained but alive. Yet the consequences are immediate, crushing, and public. Anonymous blogs erupt with lies. Audra Sterling sleeps her way to the top. New Girl attempts late-night shakedown. Agencies rescind offers, casting calls vanish, doors slam with a finality that crushes not only opportunity but reputation. Hollywood, the city of dreams she had fought so hard to enter, turns into a tribunal, branding her a villain for surviving the horrors that no one else acknowledged. The narrative pivots to show Audra's response to exile and humiliation. She retreats, forced into a self-imposed exile, a period of isolation that is both painful and transformative. Yet even in the silence, a new purpose emerges. The camera follows her through late nights spent with online courses in digital forensics, media law, crisis management, and public relations. Each keystroke, each carefully curated learning experience is a brick in the foundation of her return. She works remotely, editing documentaries, analyzing digital evidence, building skills the industry never teaches its victims. She studies the law, social media influence, and the machinery of media manipulation. Her transformation is gradual, meticulous, each moment of quiet preparation reinforcing a singular truth: She wasn't preparing for fame or applause. She was preparing for justice, for the moment where the predator could be confronted with irrefutable proof of wrongdoing. The camera emphasizes her diligence, showing stacks of notes, open laptop screens filled with legal research, recordings of interviews, and a meticulously organized digital archive, all signifiers of a mind honed for strategy rather than emotion. This period also establishes her credibility for the audience. Unlike a traditional revenge story fueled by rage alone, Audra's journey demonstrates intelligence, preparation, and discipline. She is no longer the girl mocked for being too raw, too inexperienced, too vulnerable. She is methodical, precise, and deeply aware of the structures that previously conspired against her. This credibility is essential. It ensures the audience understands that when she strikes back, it is not through recklessness or luck, but through calculated, forensic-level preparation. Her mastery of digital evidence, legal nuance, and media strategy gives her the authority to reclaim not only her career, but to dismantle the very systems that enabled her abuse. Each skill she acquires is framed as a tool of empowerment, a means to level a playing field that was never intended to be fair. Finally, the introduction concludes with a powerful emotional pivot. The humiliation and exile that once threatened to define her identity now form the crucible of her transformation. The camera returns to her present-day self, Audra Sterling, now Ayra Solace, on her balcony, the city lights sprawling beneath her. Her posture is calm, her gaze sharp, her presence commanding. She is poised, but the audience senses the fire smoldering beneath the surface. The voiceover delivers the transition line with gravitas. She wasn't preparing for fame, she was preparing for justice. This line not only bridges the introduction to the forthcoming acts of strategic revenge, but also solidifies her as a protagonist the audience will root for. Intelligent, empowered, and relentless. By the end of this segment, viewers are emotionally invested in her journey, empathetic to her suffering, and intellectually engaged in the meticulous transformation that will enable her to take on a Hollywood system built to silence and exploit. From the first glimpse of her small-town dreams to the intimate details of her preparation for the ultimate reckoning, this introduction crafts a complete portrait of Audra Sterling. It balances vulnerability with emerging power, emotional struggle with tactical intelligence, and tragedy with the promise of strategic triumph. Viewers leave this section understanding who she is, what she endured, and why her story matters, not as a mere tale of revenge, but as an epic narrative of survival, empowerment, and meticulously executed justice. By the time the introduction ends at 10:30, the stage is fully set for the audience to follow her through the intricate, high-stakes, and morally compelling path of her vengeance against a corrupt and predatory Hollywood system. The aftermath of that harrowing night was immediate, brutal, and merciless. Audra Sterling, once the bright-eyed hopeful with dreams of cinematic glory, found herself submerged under a tidal wave of public defamation, her very existence rewritten by whispers, lies, and malicious exaggerations. Hollywood, which had promised opportunity, recognition, and validation, had transformed overnight into an unforgiving tribunal. The morning after her narrow escape, she awoke not to encouragement or support, but to the insidious machinery of rumor and gossip already in motion. Anonymous articles began appearing across the entertainment blogs that dictated public perception. Headlines screamed accusations she hadn't committed, twisted details of the assault she had survived into perverse narratives of desperation and manipulation. Audra Sterling sleeps her way to the top. One read, "Late-night shakedown at studio meeting." Another claimed, "The words stung, but more than that, they were lethal to the fragile scaffolding of her nascent career." Every studio head, every casting director, and every agent she had hoped would see her potential now saw only scandal, controversy, and risk. Doors that had seemed within reach slammed with a finality that no amount of pleading or explanation could reverse. Her phone became a weaponless battleground. Calls went unanswered. Agencies that had once courted her suddenly refused representation. Emails went unanswered, or worse, were met with polite but dismissive refusals. Even those who had briefly believed in her talent now skirted around her, unwilling to jeopardize themselves by associating with a name so rapidly toxic. The studios, powerful yet anonymous, acted swiftly, orchestrating an invisible cordon around her opportunities, each rejection a subtle echo of the assault itself. Social media amplified the humiliation, as hashtags and viral posts painted her as the villain of a story she had never authored. Friends she had made within the acting community, fearful for their own survival, drifted away or remained silent, leaving Audra isolated, both professionally and emotionally. It was as if the city she had crossed the country to conquer had erected walls around her, the glare of its neon lights now highlighting her vulnerability rather than her potential. In those first weeks, despair settled over her like a suffocating fog. She wandered the streets of Los Angeles at night, her mind replaying the events that had destroyed her career. Self-doubt gnawed relentlessly. Did she misread the signals? Was there a fault in her ambition that had allowed her to become prey? The legal and social systems had failed her. Hollywood itself seemed indifferent, its machinery more invested in protecting a powerful predator than seeking truth. Every reflection she caught of herself, in mirrors, in shop windows, in the darkened puddles after rain, seemed to show not the actress she had dreamed of being, but a casualty, a cautionary tale in the city of broken promises. Her dreams, once vivid, now appeared fragile, shattered fragments she wasn't even sure she could piece back together. But in the quiet corners of her apartment, away from flashing cameras, judgmental glances, and merciless headlines, a different emotion began to take root. Rage, silent but profound, mixed with clarity. It wasn't the explosive anger of immediate retribution. It was a calm, simmering recognition that if she wanted justice, or even a semblance of fairness, she would need to become more than she had been. Survival alone would not suffice. She had been underestimated, mocked, and written off. That underestimation, she realized, was the weapon she could turn to her advantage. The world had assumed she would crumble, and that assumption became the foundation upon which she could rebuild herself, stronger, sharper, and more deliberate than ever before. Her early coping strategies were quiet, deliberate acts of reinvention. With no studio projects to anchor her financially, she sought remote work, ghost editing documentaries, and digital content for firms willing to leverage her skills discreetly. Each frame she cut, each sequence she polished, became a reminder of her capability and a small reclaiming of agency. But she didn't stop there. Nights were spent hunched over laptops, enrolling in online courses that ranged from digital forensics to media law, from crisis management to public relations strategy. Every skill was a tool, a weapon, and a shield. The world of Hollywood had assumed that exposure and scandal were enough to destroy her. She decided to turn knowledge into armor, understanding that the very systems that had betrayed her could be navigated, exposed, and ultimately dismantled if wielded with patience and precision. Her apartment, modest and unremarkable to anyone passing by, transformed into a command center of clandestine preparation. Spreadsheets, legal templates, archived emails, digital footprints meticulously cataloged. Every lesson learned during her public humiliation applied toward a single, overarching strategy of reclamation. As she immersed herself in this world of discreet learning and methodical preparation, her mindset began to shift. The narrative that had sought to make her a passive victim was rejected, replaced with a new paradigm. She would not survive by bending or conforming. She would survive by thinking several moves ahead. Hollywood was a chessboard, she realized, and she had spent too long as a pawn. Now, she would learn to anticipate the king's moves, to predict the queen's strategies, to recognize the subtle patterns that governed power in a city built on illusion and perception. The system that had abused her operated on secrecy, intimidation, and coercion. By mastering digital forensics and PR law, she could navigate that system with precision, transforming vulnerability into leverage. Every rumor, every smear, every rejection became data. Every slight, every subtle threat, every insinuation became a vector to analyze, a weakness to exploit when the time was right. Emotionally, the exile forced Audra to confront herself in ways the spotlight never had. The rage that once threatened to consume her in flashpoints of despair became refined, distilled into clarity of purpose. Self-doubt, which had once been overwhelming, now served as a check against recklessness, It ensured every action she would take in the future would be calculated, deliberate, and precise. This was not the reckless revenge of the moment, it was the patient, strategic orchestration of a plan so thorough that it would leave no room for counterattack. She began journaling, mapping out the intricate web of studio politics, mentor influence, and media machinery that had orchestrated her fall. Each entry was a blueprint, a reminder that the city had underestimated her. They had assumed she would vanish quietly, that her career could be erased without consequence. Their arrogance became the very fuel that would later propel her meteoric return. Through these months of solitude, Audra also built networks of discreet allies. Former classmates, peripheral actors, and supportive educators, those who had observed her talent and integrity without the glare of Hollywood's judgment, became silent collaborators. She didn't yet need witnesses or public support, but the connections she cultivated were strategic, ensuring that when she was ready to act, the resources and credibility to execute her plan would be immediately available. Each interaction, each trust carefully earned, was another layer in her covert architecture of comeback. The exile also provided a lens through which she could analyze the very mechanics of her betrayal. She understood that Elias Vance's power was not an anomaly, but a symptom of a systemic rot. The way he manipulated contracts, controlled information, leveraged gossip, and activated the studio's PR machinery was instructive. Hollywood was a world where appearances outweighed truth, and the power imbalance could crush a person overnight. Understanding this system was not merely an academic exercise, it became the basis of her strategy. If the predator relied on perception, misinformation, and control, then she would counter with evidence, meticulous documentation, and public influence. She would transform the very tools of her oppression into instruments of accountability. In tandem with this analytical approach, her personal transformation accelerated. The camera lingers on quiet sequences, late-night workouts, careful dietary routines, hours spent practicing lines, expressions, and body language in front of mirrors. She rebuilt her physical presence, not for vanity, but to command attention and presence on her own terms. She learned to mask vulnerability and exude control, preparing for the public-facing battles to come. Every detail mattered: her appearance, her speech, her ability to manipulate perception without compromising integrity. And yet, even amidst this relentless preparation, moments of human vulnerability remained. Audra Sterling was not a machine. She felt isolation acutely. She mourned the career she might have had, the recognition she had been denied, and the betrayal of trust so intimate it had been weaponized against her. These emotional undercurrents were never suppressed. Instead, they were harnessed, becoming the undercurrent of her strategic patience. Her quiet rage was never about spectacle. It was about precision. She repeated to herself, often in whispered mantras late at night, "They didn't just take my career, they underestimated my patience." The words were not mere defiance. They were a prophecy, a declaration of intent that would guide every subsequent action. By the end of this period of self-imposed exile, Audra had evolved from the raw, talented, and vulnerable girl who had arrived in Los Angeles into something far more formidable: a strategist, an observer, a planner. She had transformed humiliation into insight, rejection into intelligence, and rage into methodology. The audience begins to sense the quiet tension building. Every setback was now a stepping stone, every slight a data point, every whisper a clue. Hollywood believed she was gone, silenced, defeated. In reality, she was quietly reconstructing herself to return, not as the naive actress they had dismissed, but as a force capable of dismantling the very system that had tried to destroy her. This chapter, The Fall and Exile, establishes the emotional and intellectual stakes for the audience. It portrays the cruelty of an industry that exploits power asymmetries, the fragility of reputation, and the psychological weight of public shaming. More importantly, it shows Audra's resilience, intelligence, and capacity for transformation. The audience is positioned to empathize deeply with her suffering, to recognize the injustice inflicted upon her, and to understand the magnitude of her patience and strategic preparation. By the time this segment concludes, viewers are ready to follow her calculated return, primed for the meticulous, morally complex journey from victim to empowered agent of justice. Audra Sterling's exile is not a story of defeat. It is a crucible in which patience, intellect, and determination are forged into a weapon. The audience leaves this chapter understanding that what appears to be weakness is merely the surface of a deeper, unyielding strength, and that Hollywood's predators, arrogant in their assumptions, have underestimated the quiet power of one person who refuses to remain silent. This foundation sets the stage for her calculated, awe-inspiring resurgence, a narrative that promises both emotional catharsis and intellectual satisfaction as justice is finally meticulously served. Audra Sterling's return to the public eye was not a casual re-entry. It was a meticulously orchestrated rebirth, a deliberate transformation that turned trauma into power and invisibility into influence. She shed her former identity entirely, adopting the enigmatic persona of Ayra Solace. The name itself was a masterstroke, evocative, memorable, and impossible to trace back to the scandal that had consumed Audra years before. She knew that Hollywood thrives on stories, on perception, on mystique. Her previous image, bright-eyed, raw, naive, and publicly humiliated, had been weaponized against her. Ayra Solace, however, was untouchable, an untraceable shadow that would move through the industry like a ghost of vengeance and ambition intertwined. Every detail of her rebranding was intentional. Hair, wardrobe, posture, speech patterns, social media presence, each element was analyzed, practiced, and perfected. She cultivated a presence that was alluring without revealing too much, commanding attention without ever seeming accessible. Her image radiated mystery, an aura that made her both desirable and intimidating, ensuring that no one could fully predict her motives or capabilities. Her debut was subtle, almost clandestine. An indie film festival became the launchpad for Ayra Solace, the carefully crafted new identity that allowed her talent to speak without the weight of her past. The festival buzzed with whispers of an actress who had emerged seemingly from nowhere, her performances raw yet refined, emotionally resonant, yet technically flawless. Critics marveled at her ability to convey depth with a minimalistic approach, and audiences were captivated by her presence on screen. Awards began to accumulate, one after the other, signaling to Hollywood that a serious new player had arrived. Her films, though independent in budget, commanded attention for their bold storytelling and the undeniable magnetism of Ayra's performances. The domestic box office records of her subsequent releases solidified her as not just a critical darling, but a commercially viable force. Every accolade, every standing ovation, every trending headline was a carefully positioned chess piece in a larger game she had only just begun to play. With fame and credibility established, Ayra began leveraging her newfound financial and social capital. The humiliation she had endured had taught her the value of foresight and preparation. She immediately assembled a team of experts who would form the backbone of her campaign for accountability and justice. Digital forensic specialists were brought in to recover and analyze old studio data, archived emails, and communications that could not be easily destroyed. Investigators scoured public records, calendars, and studio logs, creating a comprehensive map of Elias Vance's operations, patterns, and past abuses. Public relations experts were hired not to promote Ayra's fame, but to control narrative exposure strategically, ensuring that every disclosure, every subtle hint of evidence, would land with maximum impact. Legal counsel familiar with employment law, whistleblower protections, and media litigation formed the final pillar, ready to navigate any challenges that would inevitably arise when challenging a Hollywood titan. Every professional involved understood that this was not about publicity. It was about precision, strategy, and the ultimate recalibration of power in an industry that had underestimated her. Once her apparatus was in place, Ayra began to execute subtle, intelligent strikes. She understood that open confrontation too early could backfire. The predators she faced had networks, influence, and resources that dwarfed her own individually. But together she was formidable. Anonymous social media accounts began to release cryptic snippets, small audio clips capturing the predatory tone of Elias Vance in private meetings. Nothing identifiable at first, nothing overtly accusatory, Yet the insiders and those aware of industry patterns immediately recognized the voice and the context. The hashtag #MeTooVance began trending, initially as speculation, then as undeniable suggestion. Industry insiders grew uneasy, projects were quietly delayed, and the first ripple of doubt began to spread through the ecosystem that had once seemed unassailable. These early strikes were surgical in their design, calculated, untraceable, and psychologically destabilizing. Ayra understood that fear, when seeded subtly, can be more effective than direct confrontation. Elias, for the first time, felt the tension, though he could not yet identify its source. The emotional power of Ayra's rebirth lay not in loud confrontation, but in the juxtaposition of her calm, poised, and calculated presence against the chaotic vulnerability of her past. Where Audra had once been reactive, terrified, and humiliated, Ayra exuded control, patience, and certainty. Every public appearance, every interview, every interaction was designed to reinforce her dominance in the narrative space. While Hollywood perceived her as a new talent, she was already several steps ahead, anticipating moves, predicting counteractions, and maintaining the advantage of invisibility. Her composure was a statement in itself, proof that trauma could be transformed into mastery, that vulnerability could be engineered into strategy, and that patience could turn the tables on even the most entrenched predators. Ayra's transformation also extended to the physical and psychological domains. She trained herself to endure long hours without fatigue, to project authority in every room she entered, and to master the art of selective revelation. She understood that every detail, her attire, her posture, the cadence of her speech, could communicate dominance, competence, and control without a single word. The audience watching her journey begins to sense this carefully orchestrated power, witnessing the evolution from a fragile girl betrayed to an invincible force navigating a treacherous system with precision. Each scene where she quietly surveys a film set, interacts with peers at festivals, or moves through studio offices reinforces this evolution, establishing a palpable tension. Ayra is no longer at risk. She is risk incarnate for those who had wronged her. Financial leverage became another pillar of her strategy. With the revenue from her independent projects, she began hiring additional experts, securing private intelligence, and acquiring access to platforms that could amplify her evidence without exposing her directly. These financial maneuvers were subtle, deliberate, and almost invisible to the untrained eye. But to someone embedded in the industry, they represented a significant shift in the power dynamics. Ayra understood the importance of not appearing overtly threatening while quietly assembling the resources necessary to execute her long-term plan. Every dollar was a tool, every investment a strategic position, and every action calculated to prepare the battlefield on which she would reclaim her narrative and expose the corruption that had nearly destroyed her life. The first public tremors of her strategy were deliberate, restrained, yet devastatingly effective. The anonymous release of audio clips showcasing Elias's casual exploitation of aspiring actresses created a quiet panic among studio executives. They were unable to act publicly without risking their own credibility, yet, internally, decisions were made to halt contracts, freeze projects, and delay investments. Ayra watched as her carefully constructed ripples became waves, understanding that she had initiated a chain reaction that could not be easily contained. Her attacks were not brute force. They were the slow, inexorable application of pressure on a flawed system. Every delay in Elias's projects, every email questioning his character, every whispered rumor verified through discreet research added layers to the foundation of the eventual public reckoning. Her calm, calculated approach was also a psychological statement aimed at Elias himself. Whereas he had relied on fear, coercion, and aggressive control to dominate others, Ayra used restraint, precision, and patience as her weapons. Her very silence became an instrument of power. While the world speculated about her motives and identity, she moved unseen, executing her plans with the confidence of someone who had been underestimated and ignored for far too long. The emotional beat here is unmistakable. The audience witnesses her shift from panic and vulnerability to unshakable self-possession. The contrast between Audra's former fragility and Ayra's current mastery reinforces the stakes. showing not just transformation, but dominance in a psychological and strategic sense. Ayra's key internal mantra during this period crystallized her mindset and the philosophy underpinning her strategy. I wasn't here to survive anymore. I was here to control the narrative. Survival had been Audra's initial goal, and survival alone had brought her to the threshold of her transformation. Now, her ambition was total control of perception, of information, and ultimately of justice. The audience sees that every subtle action, whether it is the selective release of information, the cultivation of allies, or the public orchestration of appearances, is not random, but a deliberate exercise in narrative dominance. Ayra's power was not about vengeance in the impulsive, emotional sense. It was about constructing an unstoppable system in which truth, justice, and public perception aligned in her favor. This chapter demonstrates the incredible lengths to which one individual can transform adversity into strategic advantage. Ayra Solace is no longer merely a talented actress. She has become an operator, a strategist, and a symbol of calculated resilience. By the end of this segment, the audience should feel both awe and anticipation. They have witnessed the painstaking construction of identity, influence, and leverage, all meticulously designed to reclaim power from those who abused it. Her calm mastery contrasts sharply with the chaos of her past, establishing a psychological tension that primes viewers for the next stages of her campaign. The exposure, accountability, and ultimate reckoning of Elias Vance, and the system that enabled him. Audra Sterling's rebirth as Ayra Solace is a lesson in patience, preparation, and precision. The audience comes to understand that her journey is not merely about personal revenge, but about systemic disruption, about transforming personal trauma into tools for justice. Each carefully calculated move, each subtle strike against Elias's empire, demonstrates her intellect, her resolve, and her mastery over a world that had sought to crush her. By the conclusion of this chapter, viewers are fully aligned with her vision, emotionally invested in her success, and acutely aware of the stakes, ready to witness the climactic execution of her plan in the chapters that follow. Ayra Solace's approach to justice was nothing like a sudden outburst or impulsive retaliation. It was the quiet, relentless construction of a machine designed to crush corruption systematically. She knew that Elias Vance was not merely a predator, he was a master manipulator, a man whose influence stretched across studios, media, and public perception. A direct confrontation, even if possible, would be easily dismissed or spun against her. Instead, she chose the path of meticulous investigation, turning patience and intellect into the most lethal weapons in her arsenal. Her first step was a deep dive into his history, a process that required both patience and discretion. Using her network of private investigators and digital forensics experts, Ayra began to comb through archived studio documents, emails, contracts, and internal memos that spanned years of his career. Each file, each communication, was scrutinized for patterns of manipulation, coercion, and abuse. Metadata from old CTV footage and digital calendars was recovered, allowing her team to reconstruct the timelines of previous incidents with accuracy that would be indisputable in court. Nothing was left to conjecture. Every piece of evidence was carefully validated, timestamped, and backed with documentation, creating a digital map of Elias's abuses that could withstand scrutiny from the most skeptical judge or investigator. But evidence alone was insufficient. Ayra recognized that systemic change required more than a single voice. It required solidarity. She reached out to other survivors, women who had endured the same calculated manipulation and harassment at the hands of Elias and his associates. The first was Maya Qureshi, a young supporting actress who had once confided in a friend about her experiences but had been silenced by fear and professional pressure. Ayra approached her discreetly, using a combination of digital security and careful vetting to ensure trust. Maya's testimony, once reluctant, became a cornerstone of the case, corroborating the patterns Ayra had documented. Others followed, former students, assistants, and actresses whose careers had been stalled or derailed by Elias's interference. Each new testimony reinforced the narrative, providing not just individual accounts but a pattern of calculated abuse, turning anecdote into systemic proof. Ayra became a unifying figure, a silent leader, giving these women the courage to speak while maintaining their safety and anonymity where necessary. The emotional weight of these connections also fueled Ayra's resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was creating a platform for all the silenced voices, turning her personal vendetta into a collective demand for accountability. The legal strategy was equally sophisticated. Ayra's team worked tirelessly to ensure that every step complied with the law while also positioning the case for maximum impact. Contracts were reviewed for hidden clauses, corporate structures were mapped to identify liable entities, and whistleblower statutes were meticulously analyzed to guarantee protection for those coming forward. Her PR consultants coordinated timing for public releases, ensuring that leaks of information or strategic revelations would land in ways that the media could not twist or dilute. Every public interaction was calculated. Every statement, photograph, and appearance was part of a broader choreography designed to maintain her calm, composed image while letting the evidence itself do the talking. Ayra understood that in a world dominated by perception, control over narrative was as crucial as control over facts. While the public saw a poised, mysterious actress rising through the ranks, behind the scenes she was constructing an airtight legal and strategic framework, a cage in which the predators could no longer hide. Psychologically, Ayra's method required immense discipline. She maintained a public calm that belied the storm she was orchestrating behind the scenes. Every interaction, every festival appearance, every press interview was deliberately composed to convey confidence, composure, and control. This calmness served a dual purpose. First, it reinforced her new identity as Ayra Solace, a figure of authority and mystique, entirely distinct from the vulnerable Audra Sterling. Second, it allowed her enemies to underestimate her, to overreach in arrogance, and to self-expose. The brilliance of her strategy lay in this subtle psychological manipulation. She became invisible, a phantom presence in their minds, all the while orchestrating a trap they could not detect until it was too late. Every time Elias believed he had assessed her, he was deceived. Every confident move he made, every misstep, added to the mountain of evidence Ayra was accumulating. The process of gathering evidence was also emotionally transformative for Ayra. Each recovered email, each corroborated story, and each document confirming abuse was a testament not only to her intellectual rigor, but to the justice she was crafting. It was not revenge in its raw emotional form, it was precision-engineered accountability. Every action reinforced her moral position. Every recovered artifact of abuse became a tool to protect future victims and prevent further harm. The quiet satisfaction she experienced was intertwined with a sense of responsibility. She was no longer a passive survivor, she was a strategist, a guardian of truth, and a beacon of solidarity for those who had been silenced by fear and power. Her triumph was measured not in immediate vindication, but in the slow, deliberate construction of a system that would make it impossible for perpetrators like Elias to escape scrutiny. Ayra's coordination extended to digital forensics and cybersecurity, critical in a world where data could be destroyed with the click of a button. Her team reconstructed deleted emails, pieced together fragmented files, and recovered hidden digital communications that proved intent and knowledge of abuse. They mapped financial transactions, studio communications, and internal memos that reflected the systematic exploitation of young actresses. Each piece of digital evidence was cross-referenced with testimonies and timestamps, creating a web of interconnected proof that was both unassailable and compelling. By the time Ayra's team was ready to act publicly, they possessed a dossier so comprehensive that it could withstand intense scrutiny from any combination of legal, media, or public opinion challenges. Her strategy also involved timing and sequencing. Ayra understood the dynamics of media cycles and public attention. Releases of information were timed to maximize impact, coincide with cultural awareness campaigns, or exploit moments when the media's focus could not be easily redirected. The initial anonymous audio snippets, for example, were carefully calibrated, brief enough to avoid defamation claims, yet potent enough to trigger recognition among insiders and instill unease in Elias's network. As the hashtag #MeTooVance began to trend, Ayra monitored reactions meticulously, adjusting the pace and scale of disclosures to maintain pressure while avoiding premature exposure that could allow Elias or his allies to mount countermeasures. The orchestration of this sequence reflects the depth of her strategic foresight. She was not reacting to events, but controlling the tempo and narrative arc with the precision of a seasoned tactician. Throughout this period, the emotional undercurrent remained palpable. Ayra experienced moments of silent satisfaction each time a recovered piece of evidence revealed the extent of the predator's duplicity. Each testimonial she gathered was both validation of her efforts and a restoration of agency for those who had suffered in silence. This emotional layer was crucial. It reminded her, and would remind the audience, that this campaign was not about vengeance in its raw, destructive sense. It was about justice designed with precision, about using intellect, preparation, and moral clarity to dismantle a system that had allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. Key to the audience's understanding of this phase is the notion that Ayra's calm exterior belied the complexity and intensity of the operations she directed. While her public appearances suggested a focused, mysterious actress gaining acclaim, her private life was dominated by the assembly and execution of a multi-pronged strategy targeting one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. She balanced the pressures of her rising career with the meticulous, almost obsessive curation of evidence, coordination with survivors, and strategic dissemination of information. The contrast between public persona and private operation heightened the dramatic tension, reinforcing her intellectual and emotional mastery. By the end of this chapter, the audience sees a fully realized transformation. Ayra Solace is no longer merely a victim or survivor. She is a strategist, a moral force, and a calculated operator whose patience, intellect, and discipline are unmatched. Every element of her plan, from technical forensics to survivor coordination, from public composure to strategic timing, serves to illustrate the sophistication of her approach and the moral superiority embedded in her actions. She has turned personal trauma into societal impact, transforming her suffering into a carefully engineered system of accountability. The chapter concludes with Ayra reflecting internally, the narrative voice emphasizing a central philosophical point. This wasn't personal vengeance, it was justice designed with precision. That line crystallizes the thematic core of her journey thus far. The victory is not about emotional retribution, but about systemic correction, accountability, and empowerment of the silenced. The audience is left with a sense of anticipation and admiration, fully aware that the groundwork has been laid for the climactic exposure, reckoning, and ultimate dismantling of Elias Vance's power in the chapters that follow. By structuring this segment around careful investigation, survivor solidarity, strategic orchestration, and moral clarity, the story emphasizes that Ayra's triumph is not impulsive, but deliberate, not petty, but profound, and that justice, when pursued with intellect, patience, and precision, can outmaneuver even the most entrenched systems of corruption. Her narrative becomes a masterclass in patience, strategy, and moral fortitude, setting the stage for the dramatic unfolding of her ultimate victory in the following chapters. The first strike was subtle, almost imperceptible to those not paying close attention, but to the insiders who had long relied on the status quo, it was seismic. Ayra Solace, once Audra Sterling, orchestrated the release of meticulously curated evidence across anonymous social media channels, carefully calibrated to draw attention without immediate identification. A short 30-second audio clip surfaced, unadorned but chilling in tone, a recording of Elias Vance discussing talent management with an unsettling detachment, referencing young actresses as assets to be moved, shaped, and controlled. No names were named, no faces shown, but the insinuation was undeniable. Industry insiders immediately recognized the voice and the pattern, while the general public, sensing a scandal, began to speculate and spread the clip. Within hours, the hashtag #MeTooVance began trending, capturing global attention. Ayra watched it unfold from her sleek Santa Monica apartment, calm and composed, the chaos she had orchestrated unfolding like a symphony. The strategic brilliance was in the timing. The leak coincided with the industry's busiest press cycle, during the week leading to a major awards ceremony, ensuring maximum visibility without risking immediate suppression. Elias Vance's reaction was instantaneous and telling. Initially, he laughed in public interviews, dismissing the clip as a distortion of casual commentary and the inevitable noise of Hollywood gossip. Behind closed doors, however, the laughter was hollow, masking palpable fear. His assistants and producers scurried to damage control, freezing upcoming projects, delaying releases, and attempting to reassure studio executives. Yet the momentum of Ayra's revelations was unstoppable. Every attempt to mitigate the fallout only amplified scrutiny, drawing reporters, insiders, and aspiring actors into the swirling narrative of impropriety. Vance had underestimated the precision of her strategy, the depth of her patience, and the sheer scale of her preparation. The industry that had once silenced her now watched as one carefully placed leak set a series of dominoes into motion, each one toppling the carefully constructed edifice of his power. Ayra's next move was personal, precise, and public in its impact, but private in execution: the trap dinner. She understood Elias's psychology intimately. He believed in his charm, his influence, and his ability to intimidate anyone who crossed him. He thought he could control the narrative, manipulate public perception, and neutralize any threat. Using a trusted intermediary, Ayra arranged a private dinner under the guise of reconciliation, ensuring that the meeting would appear innocuous to the outside world. The restaurant was discreet, high-end, with professional staff who had been thoroughly vetted to avoid leaks. Hidden within a seemingly innocuous digital recorder was the lifeblood of her final act. Every word Elias spoke, every attempt to intimidate, every offer of hush money, every veiled threat was captured with crystal clarity. Ayra maintained her composure throughout the evening, her eyes calm, her voice measured. But each subtle movement, each slight nod, was part of a choreography that projected power without aggression. As the dinner progressed, Elias began to realize, piece by piece, that the girl he had humiliated years ago was no longer powerless. His attempts to intimidate her fell flat, every threat carefully logged and timestamped by her device. When he casually referenced his influence over industry networks, she responded only with a small, enigmatic smile and a measured, "That's exactly why everything you just said will be public tomorrow." The panic flickering across his face was slight at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew with each passing minute. He attempted to pivot, offering financial settlements and promises, hoping to sway her discretion, but Ayra's calm and preparation rendered each maneuver futile. This was not a confrontation. It was a strategic extraction of truth, captured unaltered, untainted, and ready for use. She left the dinner without uttering another word, letting the recorder and the evidence do the talking. By the time he comprehended the gravity of the situation, the storm was already taking form beyond his control. The coordinated release of the evidence was executed with military precision. Ayra's team disseminated verified clips, transcripts, and emails to multiple channels, mainstream media outlets, independent investigative reporters, legal authorities, and influential social media figures. Each release was staged to maximize scrutiny and prevent immediate suppression or legal maneuvering from Elias's side. Studio executives, realizing the weight of the evidence and the public attention it had garnered, began to pause contracts, halt ongoing projects, and distance themselves from Vance. The media frenzy escalated rapidly, the story dominating headlines, late-night commentary, and social feeds around the world. Ayra remained off-camera, her presence unknown, her identity meticulously shielded, allowing the narrative to center entirely on the evidence rather than personal vendettas. Her invisibility became a psychological advantage. She had become the ghost in the machine, the architect of a public reckoning that Elias could neither negotiate with nor suppress. The legal escalation followed naturally from the public exposure. With verified recordings, corroborated testimonies, and digitally authenticated evidence, Ayra's legal team approached authorities, filing formal complaints with state investigators and relevant labor boards. Each submission was airtight, meticulously prepared with cross-referenced documentation, ensuring that attempts to discredit the evidence or dismiss the claims would fail. The authorities, confronted with the scope and clarity of the evidence, had no choice but to act. Investigations were launched, subpoenas issued, and interviews scheduled. For the first time, The structures that had protected Elias for decades began to crumble, revealing a system that could no longer conceal its complicity. The media, sensing the historic significance, amplified the coverage, ensuring that public scrutiny and legal action progressed in parallel. Elias's influence, long thought untouchable, eroded rapidly. He found himself isolated, his carefully cultivated network of allies hesitant to intervene for fear of association. Power that had once been absolute became precarious. Contracts were frozen, projects stalled indefinitely, and professional relationships began to dissolve as colleagues and investors sought distance. The psychological impact on Elias was profound. Every move he made was now calculated against the possibility of exposure. This was the intellectual revenge Ayra had envisioned, stripping him not only of professional advantage, but of the certainty, the control, and the fear he had wielded for years. She had not attacked him physically, nor had she indulged in public spectacle. She had methodically dismantled his empire through strategic foresight, patience, and the meticulous application of evidence and influence. Emotionally, the narrative of Ayra's rise to strategic dominance resonated not just with the audience within the story, but with the audience watching it unfold. Every action she took was measured, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos enveloping her targets. Where Elias reacted impulsively, Ayra responded with calculated precision. Where he relied on intimidation, she relied on documented truth. Each public revelation, each halted project, each social media exposure served to reinforce the magnitude of her transformation. From the humiliated, blacklisted actress to a commanding presence capable of enforcing accountability at the highest levels. The tension was tangible. The audience understood the stakes, the meticulous planning, and the inevitability of the downfall once Ayra had set her mechanisms in motion. The culmination of this chapter occurred with the undeniable public impact of her actions. Studio executives issued formal statements distancing themselves from Vance. Ongoing projects were indefinitely delayed, and journalists published detailed investigative pieces verifying the claims and evidence. Social media amplified every detail, generating viral discussion and public outrage. Ayra's strategic calm throughout the escalation intensified the psychological pressure on Elias. He could no longer rely on charm, influence, or fear to mitigate the consequences. His authority had been systematically eroded by a combination of strategic patience, intellectual rigor, and moral clarity that he had never anticipated. The emotional peak of this chapter is solidified in the key line. The girl they humiliated became the storm they couldn't survive. This is more than a narrative climax. It is a philosophical statement, encapsulating the journey from vulnerability to empowerment, from victimhood to strategic dominance. Ayra's revenge is not impulsive or vindictive. It is deliberate, precise, and public in consequence, serving both as personal vindication and as systemic correction within an industry that had long protected predators under the guise of mentorship and opportunity. By the end of this segment, the audience is left with a profound sense of closure and awe. They have witnessed the orchestration of an intricate plan that balances legality, ethics, strategy, and emotion. Ayra remains composed, unseen, untouchable. Her victory measured not in immediate spectacle, but in sustained impact, forcing accountability and setting a precedent for future actors and industry stakeholders. The chapter ends with the sense of inevitability. Elias Vance's empire is fractured, his control extinguished, and the moral and legal order restored, not through brute force, but through intellect, patience, and unassailable evidence. Every beat of this chapter reinforces a critical lesson. Revenge, when paired with discipline, planning, and moral clarity, can achieve outcomes far more satisfying and lasting than emotional retribution alone. Ayra's success demonstrates the power of the mind over brute force, of evidence over rumor, and of patience over impulsivity. It is a testament to strategic mastery, to intellectual vigilance, and to the ethical responsibility to wield power with precision and justice. By structuring this chapter around public impact, psychological pressure, coordinated evidence release, and systemic dismantling of influence, the narrative highlights the sophistication of Ayra's approach and the finality of her victory. The audience emerges with a sense of satisfaction, closure, and admiration, understanding that this is not just a story of revenge, It is a blueprint of meticulous justice, executed with precision, patience, and uncompromising moral authority. Ayra Solace watched from a discreet corner as the last domino fell into place, the culmination of years of meticulous planning, patience, and unwavering resolve. The courtroom was packed, a sea of journalists, curious onlookers, and survivors whose lives had been upended by the same man she had endured. Elias Vance sat at the defense table, his face pale, drawn, a stark contrast to the confident, predatory figure that had once towered over her. For the first time in decades, he was exposed, powerless, and acutely aware that the full weight of accountability had finally arrived. His producers, the silent accomplices who had maintained the fade of mentorship while exploiting young actresses, were equally trapped, their reputations shredded, their careers hanging by a thread. Ayra had orchestrated every move with the precision of a chess grandmaster. There were no surprises, no impulsive actions, only the slow, relentless unfolding of justice. She didn't need to speak in the courtroom, didn't need to dramatize her suffering or appeal to sentiment. The evidence, authentic, undeniable, and strategically documented, spoke with a voice more powerful than hers ever could. Each email, each recording, each corroborated testimony constructed a narrative so airtight that defense attorneys could only flounder. Every lie, every cover-up, every past betrayal of trust was laid bare, exposed under the harsh light of undeniable truth. As she sat in the back row, Ayra's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around Elias. The man who had once wielded power with casual cruelty now fumbled through every objection, his voice cracking, his composure slipping. The judge, impartial yet firm, absorbed the weight of the evidence, allowing the narrative of systemic exploitation and abuse to unfold naturally, without interference. Ayra's choice to remain silent in these moments was deliberate. She understood that power need not be declared to be felt. Her silence magnified the impact of the truth, leaving the court, the media, and the public to witness her victory without theatrics. The lesson was clear. Evidence, strategy, and patience can dismantle the most formidable adversaries more decisively than anger or confrontation ever could. She had transformed personal trauma into an instrument of systemic reform, and the court proceedings were a living testament to that philosophy. Outside the courtroom, the effects rippled through Hollywood. Studio executives who had once cowered before Elias and his network of influence now reevaluated their internal policies, forced to confront uncomfortable realities about workplace power dynamics and systemic abuse. Industry guilds launched independent reviews, implementing new safeguards to protect young actors, tighten oversight, and hold mentors accountable. Ayra's efforts were far from symbolic. They represented tangible, structural change. No single headline, no viral clip, no momentary outrage could have achieved the lasting impact she had engineered. Her victory was systemic, not merely personal. It altered the trajectory of an industry that had long protected predators and silenced victims, establishing precedent and accountability in ways that would persist long after headlines faded. This was the core of her moral lesson. True justice is not simply revenge. It is the careful, strategic application of truth to correct wrongs, to prevent further harm, and to restore balance to a system skewed by power and exploitation. Ayra returned to her personal life with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had reclaimed not only her career, but her autonomy and dignity. She resumed her work in film under her new identity, Ayra Solace, carefully curating each role, each public appearance, and each media interaction to reflect not only her artistry but her strategic understanding of influence. Her projects flourished, both commercially and critically, yet her focus was never on personal glory alone. She became a mentor to young actors, particularly those who had faced similar systemic abuse, guiding them through the treacherous waters of Hollywood with lessons that combined practical skills, legal awareness, and emotional resilience. Her memoir, Shattered Spotlight, From Darkness to Justice, became required reading at numerous film schools and acting workshops, offering both cautionary tales and strategic insight. Within its pages, she chronicled not just her personal experiences, but the methods she had used to effect systemic change, providing a roadmap for others who might confront similar injustices. Despite the public attention, Ayra maintained a remarkable balance of visibility and discretion. She allowed her work, her mentorship, and her evidence-backed victories to speak louder than any public statement she could issue. She understood that real power lay in the subtlety of influence, in shaping outcomes without succumbing to the impulsive satisfaction of public spectacle. Every press release, every interview, and every public appearance was carefully calibrated to maintain credibility, focus on ethical issues, and reinforce the message that systemic justice, patience, and evidence were more potent than raw vengeance. By choosing this path, she modeled a form of strategic power that was as inspiring as it was effective, demonstrating that courage and intelligence could combine to create lasting impact. Ayra's moral reflection was profound. The revenge she had exacted was not rooted in hatred or retribution, but in a higher, systemic purpose. She recognized that the true measure of justice lay not in destroying a single adversary, but in constructing conditions where abuse could no longer thrive unchecked. Her meticulous planning, her patient accumulation of evidence, and her strategic dissemination of truth exemplified a form of moral superiority, one that rejected impulsive rage in favor of controlled, intentional action. Each carefully executed step reinforced the principle that long-term accountability, ethical rigor, and foresight are more powerful than momentary vengeance. By staying calm, patient, and strategic, she had forced a powerful man and his collaborators to confront the consequences of their actions, ensuring that their influence would never again threaten the vulnerable. There was also a deeply emotional component to her victory. Ayra had not only reclaimed her own narrative, but had restored hope for countless others who had been silenced, exploited, or marginalized. Survivors of Elias Vance's predation found in her an exemplar of resilience and tactical intelligence, a beacon that illustrated the potential of transforming personal trauma into meaningful change. Young actors, aspiring performers, and other industry participants began to see pathways for justice that did not require compromising integrity or succumbing to fear. Ayra's victory was therefore communal as well as personal, a demonstration that strategic courage could create structural change that reverberates far beyond a single individual. The final emotional beats of her journey were subtle yet powerful. She returned to the spaces that had once been sources of humiliation, the film sets, the festival stages, the public panels, with a renewed sense of authority and calm. She walked into rooms that had once closed to her and was now greeted not with doubt or scorn, but with respect, acknowledgement, and admiration. The spotlight that had once blazed down on her with crushing intensity was now under her control, illuminating not just her success, but the principles she had fought to uphold: courage, accountability, and truth. This reversal was more than symbolic. It was a reclamation of agency and a demonstration of how disciplined, patient strategy could convert vulnerability into unparalleled strength. Her internal satisfaction was matched by the practical outcomes. Elias Vance faced arrest, legal scrutiny, and professional exile. His producers were held accountable, with contractual and legal consequences that curtailed their ability to exploit future talent. Studio systems were overhauled, policies rewritten, and industry practices re-examined. Each of these outcomes was meticulously engineered by Ayra's prior research, strategic planning, and careful deployment of evidence. She had not merely survived an assault on her career and dignity, she had reshaped the power dynamics of an entire industry, ensuring that others would not have to endure the same level of systemic abuse. The key lesson embedded in this chapter, and in the culmination of Ayra's story, is clear and universal. True revenge, true justice, does not require blind anger, impulsive retaliation, or public spectacle. It is measured, methodical, and designed to create lasting, systemic change. It is rooted in patience, strategic thought, and the disciplined use of evidence. By focusing on precision, moral clarity, and the orchestration of outcomes, Ayra demonstrated that those who underestimate patience and strategy are often the ones most exposed to their own undoing. Her journey reframes the concept of revenge from raw emotional reaction into a higher-order pursuit of justice, turning personal suffering into empowerment, accountability, and institutional reform. By the end of this chapter, Ayra's personal and professional victories converge. She continues to thrive as Ayra Solace, her artistry recognized and celebrated, while her mentorship and advocacy cultivate a culture of awareness, resilience, and empowerment among the next generation. Her memoir, her public talks, and her discreet guidance all serve to reinforce a legacy of strategic, ethical justice. The audience is left with a profound sense of closure, the predator is exposed and punished, the system is corrected, and the protagonist is both victorious and morally elevated. Ayra's story resonates not only as a narrative of revenge, but as a blueprint for courage, intelligence, and moral rigor in the face of systemic injustice. The narrative closes with a deeply satisfying emotional and philosophical beat. The spotlight that once blinded me is now mine to shine, on truth, courage, and justice. In this moment, the audience comprehends the full arc of Ayra's journey, from vulnerable newcomer to victim, from strategic planner to unassailable force of accountability. Her soft yet unmistakable call to action, "If this story inspired you, you already know why you stayed," serves not only as a bridge to reflection, but as an invitation to recognize the potency of patience, evidence, and moral courage in the pursuit of justice. Every sentence, every beat, every reflection reinforces that Ayra's revenge was not impulsive or vindictive. It was systemic, intellectual, and transformational. She restored hope, enforced accountability, and reshaped the very structures that had once sought to destroy her. The chapter concludes on the ultimate moral note. Courage combined with strategic intelligence and patience can create a justice more enduring and impactful than any act of raw fury ever could. She didn't merely reclaim her life, she redefined what it means to fight, endure, and triumph in the face of systemic oppression.